Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear friends, first of all, Alice, thank you very much for these introductions. You were far too kind. And I have to tell you that if it was reported in my country that you wanted me to stay on for another 50 years, there would be a great number of people quite startled with that statement. But I want to begin by thanking the government of Singapore and also the Maritime Institute for having brought this forum together with us in the Arctic Circle, and thereby enabled all of us here today to participate in what is truly the first Asian gathering of this scale and this diversity on the future of the Arctic. Never before in human history have representatives from so many countries, from so distinguished and varied background, come together in an Asian country to discuss the future of the northernmost part of the world. And the President of Singapore, President Tan, and I mentioned yesterday in our meeting that it's only 3 years ago that I came to Singapore to participate in the Ocean Conference hosted by The Economist, where I met the Deputy Prime Minister. And at that time, there was really no connection or even relationship between my country and Singapore, and the Singapore formal involvement in the Arctic had not really begun. Now, 3 years later, we have Singapore as an observer state in the Arctic Council. We have delegations from Singapore participating in all of the assemblies of the Arctic Circle, playing a prominent role in making that venue the largest international annual gathering on the Arctic. I think what has happened in these 3 years is an extraordinary manifestation that we now live in an entirely different world, where things happen more quickly, more comprehensively, and with greater effect than ever before. We can no longer afford the luxury of having a few decades to execute and plan what we want to do, because events are really catching up with us. And the Arctic is a very stark reminder that this is indeed happening. We tend to forget in our discussions that we are in fact talking about a large part of our planet, Alaska. With all due respect to our friends here from that great state, although it is twice the size of Texas, it is 3 times. Well, that is new information to me. I will revise my statement about the size of Alaska, but despite that fact, Alaska is only a part of the vast territory of the Arctic. The great northern territories of Canada, Greenland, half the size of Western Europe, and then Iceland and the Nordic countries, and the big part of the North Atlantic, ranging into the Arctic seas, and of course Russia with its 7 time zones in the north. We are in fact talking about a big part of our planet, which until 20 or so years ago was completely unknown and unmapped territory of global cooperation. This is the first time in human history that we come together, the nations and the governments and the authorities and the business community and the research institutions of the world, and face the challenge to organize and plan and bring together in a successful, sustainable way such a big part of our planet. I've sometimes reminded people, just to give them an idea of the scope, it is as if Africa suddenly appeared on our radar screen of cooperation. And we were faced with the task in a matter of few years to come together, the global community as well as the relevant states that have territorial claims and rights in the area, to make a successful framework for cooperation. That is our task. That is our challenge. And if we mess it up, dear friends, it will not only have grave consequences for the Arctic, but also for the entire planet. Because what happens in the Arctic has great consequences for every country and every continent in the world. It is indeed, as we know, extraordinarily rich in resources of great relevance and importance for the leading economies of the 21st century and the 22nd century. Rare metals, minerals, mining, not only oil and gas, but also extraordinarily rich in renewable energy resources, hydro, geothermal, wind, and with the present technologies of ocean cables, the renewable energy projects in the Arctic and the Northern Territories can help to change the energy systems of other countries. But also, as we have discussed here in Singapore yesterday and before, the melting of the Arctic sea ice is quickly and fast, much faster than any one of us expected 5 or 10 years ago, opening up the possibility of new sea routes linking Asia to Europe and America in a completely new way. And as COSCO demonstrated with its first trial journey 2 years ago, with a cargo vessel, container ship from Singapore to Rotterdam, took 10 days shorter than going through the normal route, saved on fuel and other costs, and was so productive that now COSCO has declared just a few weeks ago that they are already starting to plan for regular cargo container traffic through the northern sea route. Russia has executed and introduced a legal framework for the northeastern sea route. Korea is already building vessels that do not require icebreakers to go through that territory, have the capability to do it on their own. And we in Iceland are already cooperating with the second largest harbor in Germany to map out and do research on whether in the northeastern part of Iceland there will be a suitable location for what could be a servicing large global harbor for the Arctic. In all of this, the experience and the development of Singapore is of critical importance. How you have made this country a significant location in the global trading system, but also how you have, as a small country, in a sophisticated, non-threatening way, placed yourself in this position. That is a contribution, as well as your diplomatic effort and your style of thinking and dealing with others, of great importance to the Arctic. And that's why, as I said to our friends from Singapore, of great diplomatic, political importance, that Singapore not only continues, but also enhances its participation in the Arctic. Already, more than half of the G20 countries are in one way or another in the Arctic. It has become, in the last few years, a kind of a playing field of the great economic powers of the 21st century, not only Russia and the United States, which have, of course, territorial claims and right to be there, but also, as we witnessed at the Arctic Circle Assembly in Reykjavik just a few weeks ago, Japan, Germany, Britain, France, and others making strong efforts and scaling up their involvement, not just because of the resources and the commercial necessities, but also they realize that the climate in every country, the sea levels in every coastal city, will be determined largely in the coming years and decades by what happens to the ice in the Arctic. One of the major reasons why the Chinese Polar Institute have sent expeditions of scientists up to the Arctic in recent years is because they have concluded that extreme weather patterns in China, causing in the last few years extraordinary destruction in big parts of China, are primarily caused by the aggressive melting of the Arctic sea ice. So what happens to the weather here in Singapore and other parts of Asia in the coming years and decades will be dependent largely by what happens to the sea ice in our northern part of the world. And if the big ice sheet in Greenland continues to melt at the pace it's now melting, and if about a quarter of it will melt into the ocean, it will mean a 2 meters rise everywhere in the world for the seawater. So Singapore, as you know it, will no longer be as it appears today or as you have planned for in the coming years and decades. So in fact, the Arctic has become not only a crucial territory of research with respect to climate change and what happens to the global oceans, not only a territory which harbors some of the most important and crucial natural resources for the 21st century and the 22nd century economies, not only a territory which could transform global shipping in the second half of this century on an enormous scale, and that is not a long time into the future, maybe 20, 30, 40 years or so. But this has also come an area where every major country in the world, the leading economies of Asia and Europe, in addition to Russia and the United States, are now actively participating and exercising their leadership and their strength. And in that state of affairs, to have a country like Singapore join us, the smaller states in the Arctic, Iceland and the other Nordic countries, is of paramount importance, because it changes the debate, it changes the dialogue, and for us that is very important. Already in the 3 years since I had this meeting here in Singapore with the President and participating in the ocean, we have seen the demonstration of this. But also with respect to the future of investments and economic activity and the financial construction partnerships that public and private authorities and players will build in the coming years. We will, at this forum, listen to a presentation from Scott Minerd on a new plan to bring together global entities in a responsible, environmentally responsible investment structure for the Arctic in the coming years, starting with the Arctic Investment Protocol, which takes into account not only the environmental responsibilities, but also the interest of the people who live in the Arctic, the people who have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, long before the present states started to make themselves felt in the territory. And then map out a kind of inventory of the investment opportunities and the investment necessities. Because in fact, we cannot have harbors everywhere in the Arctic. We cannot have crucial airports everywhere in the Arctic. We have to also construct the power lines and the energy structure in such a way that they are effective and reliable. We need, for this big part of the planet, a coordinated global effort of where the necessary infrastructure is going to be built and executed. And that must be done not in a race of one economic player against another, but in a joint cooperative effort and in a comprehensive way, perhaps led by what we could create at the end of this process, be a kind of a Arctic investment vehicle, whether it's a bank or a fund, but especially creating a framework where every commercial entities, whether it's an entrepreneur or corporation that enters this big part of the world, realizes that they carry not only their financial interest, but also a great environmental responsibility, and have to be respectful of the interest and the culture and the lifestyle of the people who have made the Arctic their home. Because it has been their home. Long, long, long before the United States of America, the Federation of Russia, the United Kingdom, ever appeared on the pages of history. These are people who have had the Arctic as their territory. They know it better than any of us. And we have to be respectful that it's their home. It's their territory. It has been like that for perhaps millions of years, thousands of years, definitely. And now the world has appeared in their backyard. Now the world has come to their home. And we, all of us who are here today, have to remember that it's not our Arctic in the way that governments or other authorities tend to present it. It is, in an essence, their Arctic, but it's also a global Arctic, because what happens there will affect citizens, poor and rich, everywhere in the world. And that is why I am extraordinarily pleased that we have succeeded to bring this forum here in Singapore together. Because by its very existence and through its discussions here today, we send a powerful signal that the world is indeed changing, has indeed changed. Because such a gathering like this would not have been possible, even would have been inconceivable a few years ago. When we came together, some of us from the Arctic, 3 or 4 years ago, to deliberate on the establishment of the Arctic Circle, we knew that we needed a new forum to scale up the level of the debate and the engagement of the countries and the other who were involved. But all the same, we would not have expected that 2 years after its foundation, the Arctic Circle at its assembly in Reykjavik would bring together 2,000 people from 50 countries and become, in such an extraordinary short time, the largest annual international gathering on the Arctic. And when we decided to add smaller but more focused meetings in other countries, we thought first about Alaska, and in August we came together in Alaska to discuss especially ports and shipping. And it became one of the most successful and best attended conferences of that kind in Alaska. A few months later, we are here in Singapore, in the first Asian gathering of its kind in the history of the world, sending a signal to other Asian countries, but also to the Arctic states and the rest of the world, that without the constructive involvement of the Asian partners, we will not make a success of the Arctic. I know there are some within the Arctic family who say it's our territory, don't let it mix it up by bringing others in from Asia or even the continental European countries. That is a very unrealistic view of the Arctic. It cannot be made successful without the constructive involvement of the leading countries and others from both Asia, Europe, and other parts of the world. And we will continue this journey of such forum. In March, we will come together in Quebec, hosted by the Premier and the government of Quebec, to discuss especially regional approaches to the solutions in the Arctic, based on the very enlightened and interesting and pioneering Plan du Nord, which the government of Quebec formalized a few years ago. And in May, hosted by the government of Greenland, we will come together there in this large territory, half the size of Western Europe, as I said before, with 55,000 people. Extraordinary small community, which now faces through its government the challenge to not only deal with their own future, but deal with the rest of the world, who now wants to be a part of their future. And here today I invite Singapore, not only the government and the authorities and our co-host, the Maritime Institute, but also the investment community, the business community, the universities, the students, the research institutions, the concerned scientists and citizens, and environmentalists and others, to be a part of these gatherings, not just annually in Reykjavik, but also in Quebec and Greenland as we move forward. But because it's important there also for Singapore and Asia to be part of the dialogue, not just here, but as we move forward in this extraordinary journey, which started only 2 years ago in Iceland and has now become a truly global platform on the future of the Arctic. Thank you very much.